Welcome and happy February 15th to everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar, How to Overcome Access Barriers to SGD Funding with Louis Golinker. My name is Sarah Blackstone and I'm your facilitator for this evening's free webinar sponsored by the United States Society for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, or USSAAC, the voice of AAC. We're doing this in collaboration with ISAAC, the International Society for AAC. We want to thank the USSAAC Director of Professional Affairs, Stephanie Meeham, and Director of Membership, Mike Hipple, as well as many of the other members of USSAAC's board who have worked to make our webinar series a success in 2017. Thanks also to ISAAC and Franklin Smith, the Executive Director of ISAAC, for making USSAAC's webinar series actually possible by providing this platform. USSAAC is excited about the response to our topic tonight. We have people almost I think 100 people registered. We know that many more will take advantage of hearing this webinar later after it is archived. As you know, the webinar is free, and so are CEUs, ASHA CEUs to USSAAC members. We do hope you will join USSAAC to show your support by going to the USSAAC website, www.usac.org. We need you to join. Our membership year is from January through December. Now, we're going to quickly go over some logistics. As you know, your microphone is muted now and it will remain muted throughout the webinar. You can, however, ask questions by typing into the question box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and you can do so at any time. Questions will be answered as time allows in the last segment of the webinar. We ask that you pose your questions in a general fashion rather than related to any specific individual. And I may group questions together that are either similar and can be answered perhaps more efficiently that way, and also if your question, we don't have time to respond to your question during the webinar, we can answer it afterwards via an email. As I said, ASHA CEU are being offered, and on the USSAAC website there is a participant form and a certificate of attendance that you can download. There'll be instructions about what to do with these as well. Note, you must stay for the duration of the webinar in order to receive CEU credits. And just so you know, our webinar platform lets us see who is on and for how long. As I said, the directions for completing the form are on the site, and non-members of USSAAC, and we hope you'll join, who wish to earn CEUs can pay $25 and can receive them. All registrants will also receive a follow-up email that provides the link to the site, and you will there find the slides for the webinar and also other archived USSAAC webinars. There is also an evaluation survey that we'd like you to fill out at the end of the, after you receive that link. So in a few days the webinar will be archived and you'll be able to hear it and see the slides. Please note that we can only offer CEUs to those who attend the live broadcast. Okay. What are you going to learn? Participants are going to learn about 6 types of speech-generating device access barriers that exist in health benefits funding programs. They're going to learn strategies that can be applied to overcome these barriers. They will hear about how the importance of a multidisciplinary team effort to implement the strategies to overcome these barriers and the roles of team members. And Lou's going to also share several case examples illustrating the multidisciplinary team-based strategy approach. Now, let's introduce Louis Golinker. Many of you, if not most of you, know who he is. He's an attorney who has long served us and long served USSAAC as Advocacy Director. He has more than 34 years of experience, and he's been expanding and protecting access to funding for speech-generating devices all that time. So all of us, listen up. After Lou is finished with his presentation, as I said, we'll have a question and answer period. Don't forget, you can type your questions anytime, and remember, if we don't get to them, you can respond by email if you like. Okay, take it away, Lou.
Thanks, Sarah, and welcome to all who are participating tonight. For some of you, this webinar will follow a familiar format. Excuse me one second, because I seem to have lost the webinar.
Lou, just letting you know, you are on the webinar. We can see your screen. You just need to bring your PowerPoint presentation up.
I need to tell me how to do that, Franklin.
Just go to the first slide in your PowerPoint presentation. Just bring it up there, first slide. There you go. And just start the presentation and you're good to go.
All right, I apologize. So let me start over and say welcome to everyone who's participating tonight. And other than this brief technical interruption, I'll talk nonstop for the next 45 minutes or so. For some of you, the webinar is going to follow a familiar format. It's going to be USSAAC's version of NPR's phoneless February fundraiser and membership drive. For the next, well, not quite hour, there's going to be a non-stop interruption of your evening, the goal of which will be to persuade you that USSAAC's important and it's valuable, and hopefully to persuade you to join and contribute to its effort and to its successes, especially now. The programs that we and our clients rely on are under attack, and assumption, bias, and opinion are driving public policy instead of knowledge and expertise. In this environment, an organization that will advance our position and promote and protect our values is needed more than ever. To be clear, our individual voices always have been important, but when we speak as a community, what we say has greater force and greater effect. To paraphrase the title of tonight's session, how do we overcome access barriers to SGD funding? There's only one answer, and it's only one word, and that word is teamwork. Our success over the past 30 years, now more than 30 years, and now our continued ability to serve our clients absolutely depends on teamwork. Great. Gail Collins is a New York Times columnist. In 2011, she wrote, "You know when you've won, when things become routine." And underneath is my description of what routine means to us. For us, routine looks like widespread coverage among funding programs, supported by professionally sound coverage criteria that are reasonably interpreted and consistently applied. For many of you, that's what exists now, in many places and in many programs. But this landscape's not nature. It's a built environment. It was created by people with complex communication needs, by SLPs, by the SGD manufacturers, and by advocates who came together to create these settings and these opportunities. They came together to get a job done. And tonight, my goal is to persuade you that proceeding as USSAAC is the best way to organize to advance as well as to protect our interests. From the very beginning of our field, SLPs have been thinking outside the box. AAC emerged as a strategy because a small number of SLPs rejected the conventional wisdom of the time, that people in long-term care facilities were beyond reach, that there was nothing that they could offer them. But thinking outside the box, they proved that the conventional wisdom was wrong. And here's an example. So I've been criticized beforehand that I put too many words on these screens, but I assume you're watching this on a computer, so I hope you can read it. It'll stay up for a while. There aren't many slides tonight, so you shouldn't worry about having these slides disappear before you get through them. Very soon after these SLPs discovered these imprisoned clients, they turned their attention and their intellects to break into the programs that could fund the tools these clients required to communicate. To accomplish this, the SLPs had to refocus their talents from evaluation, recommendation, and treatment to questions of policy. And when they began, they had to start from scratch. AAC devices, or voice output communication aids as they were called at that time, were new products, and they weren't on anyone's list of what's covered. The therapists recommending them also were new to funding program staff who reviewed benefits requests, and they had little prior contact with SLPs or with the vocabulary. To get funding, SLPs had to show that these devices fit, that they're medical devices, that they serve a medical purpose, and that they're medically necessary. We'll take all of that for granted now, but then it had to be proved. To address medical device, serve a medical purpose, and medically necessary, SLPs and advocates invented a 3S strategy: same, similar, and severity. The medical purpose of SGDs is as treatment for severe communication impairment. In general, SLPs have the professional responsibility to identify the impairment, to measure its severity, to chart its course, to determine treatment options, and to set treatment goals. And those goals are generally to allow the client to meet their daily communication needs. And we said in regard to SLPs and in regard to speech-generating devices, we're talking about the same conditions, the same professional providing the same service, the same evaluation process, the same treatment goals, just from people who have more severe impairment than treatment directed at improving natural speech. We also said that these tests are similar to or identical to the physical impairments and physical therapist role related to wheelchairs, and also similar to, if not identical to, people with respiratory impairments and the respiratory therapist role with regard to ventilators. We also said, look at what SGDs and wheelchairs do. Both serve the same purpose. They're functional bypasses, or they're functional substitutes. We use working body parts and these devices to accomplish what non-working body parts won't allow people to do. These explanations were supported by position statements. ASHA issued one in 1981. Scope of practice outlines that said that considering AAC interventions are part of the scope of practice of speech pathology. Texts and treatises, one of the first of which was edited by Sarah, An Introduction to AAC. And an emerging professional literature in the AAC journal and in other journals. And also by advocacy decisions equating wheelchairs and speech-generating devices and FDA rules which do the same thing. With regard to medical need, today it's generally accepted that medical need for a speech-generating device is established when the individual with complex communication needs is unable to meet daily communication needs using speech or other natural communication methods. But this wasn't the funding source's first view of medical need. At first they said speech-generating devices aren't medically necessary at all. They said they don't treat conditions, they only treat effects. Speech isn't medical, speech is a convenience, that signing, writing, or pointing at boards or books are enough, and that if you have 24 care access all your needs are going to be met. Then they shifted focus to the content of speech and the characteristics of your communication partners. They said only medical words were important, words that were necessary to get health issues addressed or get health needs met. That you only had to communicate to caregivers, that you only had to get your basic needs met. And finally, they tried to shift focus to the place where the communication occurs or the evaluator. That medical necessity doesn't exist if you're in school or if the use of a speech-generating devices is on your IEP or on the client's IEP, or if a school speech pathologist did the evaluation. We had to prepare responses to all of these excuses, and SLPs and advocates applied the 3S principle to overcome all of them. With regard to treating effects, well, rather than treating a condition, what does a wheelchair do? It does exactly the same thing. That speech isn't medical, that speech is a convenience. Well, why is SLP treatment covered as a health benefit in the same programs? With regard to speech being a convenience, I don't think that Andrew would think that speech is a convenience for him. With regard to signing, writing, and pointing, that's not even considered in speech-language pathology evaluation or evaluation for an artificial larynx. Also, we showed that just using signing or writing or pointing won't work because your partners don't understand what you're doing. You can't speak on the phone. It depends on where you're sitting in relation to the person you're trying to communicate with. Your symbols, your spelling, people may not be able to understand it. Anybody who's a communication partner with a vision impairment won't be able to see what you're doing. 24-hour care, that's great if you have it, but I've always wondered whether ESP is a job that's characteristic or a job requirement of someone providing 24-hour care. Because the only way to really know if what's being offered or what's being done is effective and is desired even is for the client to say so, and the client can't. With regard to the messages, with regard to the content of speech, the condition that is the communication impairment is what the communication device is treating. The message is not important. It's also, the message is not subject to any control with regard to the device. No device comes with fixed messaging for the past 30 years or so. There was a device way back when that came preset with vocabulary that was fixed, but no more. Devices can say anything. And here are the two decisions that make it very clear that the decision makers recognize that the communication device is medical because you have a condition that makes it impossible for you to meet your daily communication needs by speaking. Your communication skills themselves are medical in nature, according to the bottom, the second one, the Melvin D decision, irrespective of the environment in which the appellant is being asked to communicate. That's why communication devices are medically necessary. And with regard to the school excuses, well, wheelchairs come and go in school, but they're still provided. If you use it in school if a child is in school and falls and cuts or breaks an arm, is that an educational blood or is it medical blood? If it's serious enough, do you call an IEP meeting or do you call an ambulance? The idea that just as for wheelchairs, speech-generating devices treat the conditions and they come and go with the student. You can't leave your communication device at home. You can't leave your communication impairment at home. Of course it's going to be used at school. These responses were crafted and they were refined over a period of years. They were spread throughout the SLP community in an almost decade-long series of presentations at local, state, and national conferences, in webinars like this one, maybe ones where people spoke a little more clearly than I am. and in policy memos on coverage and convenience items that were prepared for USSAAC and posted at its webpage. Advocates distributed these principles and responses in their networks of conferences and in their shared legal papers. These responses were also put before funding sources, first by SLPs, who inserted them in their evaluation reports, who explained them when they served as witnesses in hearings, and explained them in expert witness affidavits in court appeals. Also, teams of SLPs and advocates together presented them to funding programs in the form of proposals to adopt SGD coverage criteria. New York Medicaid was the first of these. It began as a collaboration between SLPs and advocates before USSAAC was created. For several years, advocates and SLPs worked together to appeal every SGD denial that Medicaid issued. In New York, almost all of these were successful. Medicaid officials eventually realized that their staff that was reviewing the original funding requests were all but irrelevant. So after years of ignoring the SLPs, Medicaid invited them to develop SGD coverage criteria, and Medicaid adopted them. For the next 10 years, SGD denials in New York were almost zero. And this success was soon replicated in other states, notably Ohio, Michigan, and then California. USSAAC reinforced this effort in 1995 by sponsoring a group of SLPs led by Sarah, who developed a set of model SGD coverage criteria that could be proposed for adoption by funding programs. During this period, advocates, people with complex communication needs, SLPs, manufacturers, and advocates also teamed up to challenge SGD coverage barriers in court. The next slide, with the exception of what happened to the states in the upper Midwest, shows where SGD court cases have been brought. The circled states are those states. Even though SGDs are a very low incidence need, they're among the most frequently litigated equipment items in the Medicaid program. There have been about 25 Medicaid court challenges in 20 different states, and they're identified on this map. There also have been 5 actions against insurers and health plans, and 1 against the telecommunications equipment distribution program, and that was in North Dakota, which is just to the left of Minnesota on the map. USSAAC participated as a party in 4 of these actions to support efforts to overturn bad coverage policies. It also added input as a friend of the court in 4 other cases that were at the appellate court level. These efforts served as a foundation for the most significant of all policy change efforts that we've undertaken, the attempt to get Medicare to accept SGDs as covered. To do so, we had to convince Medicare to change its conclusion that SGDs were convenience items. Beginning in 1997, about a dozen SLPs and advocates agreed to work together on this goal. We were soon joined by representatives from Dynavox and Sunrise Medical, who included experts in Medicare funding and lobbyists. This Medicare team worked together for almost 4 years. One of its principal work products was a literature review describing SGD's role and effectiveness as treatment for several communication impairments. This document, known as the formal request, was submitted on behalf of Medicare beneficiaries with complex communication needs with the support of USSAAC and a dozen other organizations. The successful outcome of this effort has led Medicare to become the largest funding source for SGDs and has had positive effects on Medicaid and insurance funding as well. The Medicare guidelines have become a nationwide template for SGD evaluation, and its scope of coverage of SGDs has become a template for SGD coverage by all other funding programs. In 2001, Medicare policy changes created a new normal regarding SGD coverage. It also confirmed that the principles we developed and advocated for almost 20 years were persuasive. And it reinforced that teamwork among SLPs, advocates, clients and their families, the SGD manufacturers, all can yield results that could not be achieved through individual effort alone. But that last point has not gotten the attention it deserves. After World War II, the Allies created NATO to provide for their common defense if a new threat to peace ever emerged. But our community has not followed that path. We dispersed, and information and resources are now spread across countless websites. This is all well-meaning, but it's very inefficient for those seeking information, and it becomes very difficult to provide information to the community as a whole when issues emerge. To correct this, I'm proposing that USSAAC become our portal for information about SGD funding, and to do so it will upgrade its webpage to achieve this outcome. And to do that, it needs help. That's one of the things I'm asking of you tonight. Since 2001, the focus of attention and the need for advocacy shifted from SGD coverage to SGD medical need. For example, New York Medicaid has tried to demand that as an outcome of a trial period, typically 1 month, the client has to demonstrate functional and proficient use of the SGD. When asked what functional and proficient means, Medicaid staff pointed to the dictionary. The dictionary definition of proficient is a thorough competence derived from training and practice. This creates an easy basis for denial. Youth and the presence of multiple impairments and their severity all make it harder to achieve thorough competence after a 1-month trial. Medicaid offers an out. It offers to pay for an extended rental of up to 10 months to offer more time and practice to reach proficiency. That may sound too good to be true, and it is. How do we respond? SLPs described their clients' conditions and severity and the results of a trial which they concluded were a success. They also reported their purpose in having a trial didn't match Medicaid's. Trials have 4 purposes. Is the client interested in using a device to speak? Does the client understand basic device operation? Can the client access and use the device? And has the trial shown that the device is a benefit to the client as compared to their pre-trial ability to express themselves? Basically, will the device offer an opportunity for the client to improve their communication abilities? Those are the purposes of a trial from the perspective of the SLP. With help from USSAAC and ISAC, this SLP's outline of the trial purposes was reinforced and as consistent with SLP standards of practice, and the Medicaid performance demand was not. With the help of the SGD manufacturers, the files of about 50 Medicaid approvals from New York were forwarded for review, and this allowed advocates to show that the same abilities Medicaid was saying justified denial in these cases were present in many Medicaid approvals for the same types of device. With the help of several SLP researchers, professional literature was identified that concluded communicative competence took years of support and practice, not 1 or a few months trial period. Also reported was a recent study from Scandinavia that followed a group of clients who had the same conditions and needed the same access methods as the New York clients. That study reported that up to 15 to 20 months was required to improve their speed and accuracy to levels that might be equated as proficiency. That's 15 to 20 times as long as a trial and 1.5 to twice as long as the so-called offer of extended rental. The SGD manufacturers also made clear that extended rental isn't available. The devices can't be loaned that long, and once a trial is over, a client's unlikely to get another opportunity to try it again. These cases are now in court, with USSAAC as a party, along with the 2 Medicaid recipients. But the coming together of several organizations, the SGD manufacturers and SLPs, has already forced New York Medicaid to drop proficiency from its SGD guideline. This example illustrates why organizations with a single focus on AAC and SGDs like USSAAC and ISAC are essential advocacy supports and resources. Another example related to medical need was insurer policies that excluded SGDs for people with autism on the basis that they're not effective when used by people with that condition. This has arisen 4 times. First, Premera and Regents are 2 Blue Cross providers operating in the Northwest. About 10 years ago, both had an SGD coverage policy that stated as an exclusion, SGDs for people with autism are not covered. These guidelines had a bibliography, and they had 8 references. That total immediately raised the question, is that all there is on this topic? Or is the conclusion based on a lazy search, or maybe a selective review of the literature? If either of those were true, the conclusion won't withstand review. But how do you accomplish that kind of a search? In this example, the advocate recognized the names of the authors, and they seem more likely to cut off a limb than support a policy that denied SGDs. That observation made the next step clear. Just ask. Each author was asked to reply to 2 questions. Did the article that they wrote, that's referenced in the bibliography, support non-coverage and denial of SGD requests? And the second question was, did their knowledge of the literature as a whole support the conclusion that's stated in the guideline, that SGDs for people with autism shouldn't be covered? All 8 responded, and all 8 said no to both questions. Their article doesn't support denial or the exclusion, and neither does the literature as a whole. These responses were sent to the insurers, and both had no choice but to withdraw the exclusion. How could they defend it when all of its support was gone? The insurer couldn't put forward someone who claimed to know more about these articles than their authors. A year later, Premera reinstated the autism exclusion, this time on the basis of a single article. The same procedure was followed in response. The author of this new article was outraged, and her response to the 2 questions was almost as long as the original article, going into great detail as to why Premera had misinterpreted her research. Once again, the exclusion was removed. A few years later, Cigna, one of the nation's largest health insurers, which operates nationwide, inserted an SGD exclusion in its autism treatment guidelines. It said there was not enough peer-reviewed professional literature to establish SGDs are effective for people with autism. This exclusion is different. It offers no specific conclusion about the literature, but it says that it's insufficient. The guideline also had a bibliography, but there were only 3 sources with any connection to AAC or SGDs at all. If Cigna staff had done a literature search, it wasn't reporting what it looked at. By law, insurers must prove that an exclusion is being applied properly to a request, meaning Cigna should have identified what its staff had read. But this was never disclosed. So we faced the burden of doing our own literature search and as well as analysis of that literature. 2 SLPs agreed to help. Pam Matthey, who was then at the Kennedy Krieger Center, or Institute rather, in Baltimore, completed a literature search and an analysis of more than 30 articles that fit the criteria in the Cigna guideline. Her analysis, as well as several other reviews of the literature, contradicted the Cigna position. Her conclusion and the other conclusions were that SGDs are established and are effective for people with autism. Oliver Wendt, a professor at Purdue, also agreed to help. He approached the literature from another perspective. Many observers have noted that our literature base is filled with studies or case reports about a single person. A problem with these studies is that it's not easy to reach general conclusions based on the experience of a single individual. Sure, it's true that we're a low-incidence population and we're geographically dispersed, and clients have multiple impairments, making it hard to find appropriate controls. But all that sounds like whining if you're looking at the literature to try and prove a point. But Ollie Wendt knew that researchers had developed a way to aggregate single subject studies and reach broader conclusions. And so he applied those procedures to a group of studies on SGD use by people with autism. His analysis led to the same conclusion as Pam Matthey. SGDs are effective for people with autism. All of this was presented to Cigna, and it agreed to drop the exclusion. Most recently, this issue arose again in 2015 in a pair of decisions issued by Humana. Humana, like Cigna, is another huge insurer operating nationwide. Its SGD exclusion was worded the same way as Cigna's. There wasn't enough literature to support a favorable outcome. For this case, the client's SLP, Carrie Kerr, agreed to perform an update of the literature search and analysis previously completed by Pam Matthey. The most recent literature is even more strongly supportive of SGD use by people with autism. When presented with the Matthey, Wendt, and Kerr materials, Humana overturned the two denials for these children. By coincidence, they were twin sisters with autism. These examples illustrate the long-standing willingness of SLPs to share their expertise and their time to help strangers. Except for the Humana example, none of the SLPs had any connection to the clients involved with these appeals. But all of them stepped away from their other responsibilities, and there are always other responsibilities to help. In regard to my purpose tonight, these examples lead to two comments. First, all the autism analysis by Matthey, Wendt, and Kerr will be posted at the USSAAC webpage, so they'll be available to anyone who may benefit from it. Second, in the 1930s, antibiotics were recently discovered miracle tools to cure infectious diseases. We're now in the 21st century, and medical literature has become the miracle tool for access to health benefits, including SGDs. Like Cigna and Humana, other insurers are claiming there's no literature or not enough literature to support favorable decisions. Presently, Regents of autism infamy is claiming there's no literature to show speech-generating device eye gaze accessories are effective. United Healthcare has taken a different approach. It redefined medical need, as it's shown here on this slide, to say that it will accept only a very specific type of research design to show effectiveness. A well-conducted randomized controlled trial or a well-conducted cohort study. These are issues that are evolving quickly, and we need to try to keep up. Our literature is dispersed in many locations. Conducting literature searches is not an easy task. Advocates are unlikely to have the skills to do them. Clinicians may not have the skill or the time or access to all the databases. But among our community, some people, most likely university faculty, have all of these resources, and I'm hoping they will consider joining USSAAC and using its webpage as a place to post literature searches on various topics and to update them periodically. Maybe it's a task that can be pursued as independent study by undergraduates or graduate students. Much of this webinar to this point has been directed to the goal of persuading SLPs to join USSAAC so it can be a stronger organization able to offer the highest quality resources and timely support to respond to more issues. I also want to direct attention to the SGD manufacturers, who had once been an integral part of USSAAC but are not members at present. We need them back too. Supporting USSAAC is a natural adjunct to the manufacturer's other SGD funding advocacy activities, and there have been many. They include providing SGD approval data that's now posted in the insurance approval database. They provide devices on loan to clients who participate in court appeals. This is, of course, a great value to the clients, but it also eases the pressure to approach cases in court as emergencies because a client is waiting without the ability to speak. And it provides use and benefit data that we can use in the lawsuit. Manufacturers also provide files of past cases to allow comparisons with current clients. They provide funding for many conference sessions and other continuing education programs to educate SLPs. They provide ongoing support for me, and they have done so for the past 20 years, so that people who have SGD needs have access to an advocate focused on their issues. The manufacturers have been essential partners in SGD advocacy, and their participation in USSAAC will make our organization stronger moving forward. Looking forward, it would be nice to repeat the line from Gail Collins, "You know you've won when things become routine." For many clients and for many SLPs, funding isn't an issue, and getting approval on funding may appear to be routine. But even if that's so, it doesn't mean we can relax. Our funding base is extremely complex, and there's an enormous potential for something to go wrong. Our national health care programs are under assault. Junk criteria continue to find their way into coverage guidelines. This is an example of guidelines that currently are the basis of a lawsuit. If you look at the bottom, this basically is just a checklist of that a reviewer would use in order to determine whether or not a communication device is to be approved in the E2510 category, which would be just about all of the synthesized speech devices. Note at the bottom, the last two questions, that in order to get an E2510 device, you need to have an extensive core vocabulary. That completely ignores the fact that people who can't access the device in order to change the pages on a digitized speech device will have no device at all available that they will be able to use. Also, even though underneath where it says source, it restates correctly how the code for these devices is defined. It says devices that permit multiple methods of message formulation and multiple methods of device access. That this guideline requires, says that multiple modes of access and methods of message formulation are necessary. Well, what if you're a person who needs eye gaze and the only way you can access the device is by eye gaze? You don't need multiple methods of access. You need that method of access. You wouldn't qualify, which is why this is being challenged in court. This is an example of junk criteria. Another example of junk criteria is the proficient use criterion in New York Medicaid. Medicare staff turned our world upside down for no reason at all in 2014, and there's no assurance that this won't happen again. The Gleason Act, which was part of the solution to the 2014 Medicare mess, needs to be renewed. It expires in 2018. It needs to be made permanent. Medical need excuses and medical literature demands are becoming more strict, as I illustrated with the United Healthcare example a few minutes ago. We need a way to respond as a community both quickly and authoritatively. So one question that arises is, what about ASHA? ASHA and USSAAC are different. There's some overlap, but their missions and their focus are not the same. ASHA's focus is really exclusively about SLPs. USSAAC has SLP focuses, but they also focus on people with complex communication needs. ASHA addresses all SLP roles. USSAAC focuses really on AAC and SGD roles only. And I offer this slide as an analogy. ASHA would be in this slide the Secretary of Transportation, responsible for all these different ways in which things move in our country. Consider USSAAC the smallest of these, the Urban Mass Transit Administration. Something that may be of major importance to USSAAC might not even make the agenda of the Secretary of Transportation based on competing issues raised by other sections of his responsibility. And the same thing is true for ASHA. ASHA has lots of potential conflicts in terms of where it's going to direct its resources, and the AAC focus just may not be able to compete. And as a result, AAC needs may not get the attention they deserve from ASHA, and we've seen that. And unfortunately, it's happened before. ASHA has no staff member dedicated to AAC, and it never has. It doesn't participate in advocacy, as does USSAAC. It's not to say that ASHA can't or doesn't help, because it does, but it isn't enough. We need USSAAC because of its focus on AAC and SGD issues. Tonight's webinar reviews some examples of how our community came together to overcome SGD funding barriers. Some of these efforts were pursued under the USSAAC banner, others weren't. But the point was to show how acting collectively, sharing your expertise in your time, can be of great benefit, and acting collectively rather than individually makes solutions to more problems and more complex problems come within reach. In simple funding requests, a clinician and a funding staff person can easily fall into a he said, she said impasse with an uninformed decision maker unable to judge credibility. But with input from a nationwide organization focused on the matter at hand, the SLP's credibility is multiplied. That's USSAAC's role. And in complex funding disputes, access to a cadre of experienced SLPs, the SLP manufacturers and advocates, can help identify a path to yes, as well as help pave that path. But organizations don't speak, they don't do research, and they don't advocate. People do. And USSAAC needs people to serve as its voice and to develop its resources. In exchange, USSAAC will offer ongoing continuing education programs on funding, a comprehensive website for information about funding, and they'll continue to work to advocate for both to perfect access to SGDs and for our clients. For those on this call who are already a USSAAC member, I say thank you. For those of you who are not, please join. We need your help, and there's lots to do. Thanks. Sarah, if you'd like to bring forward questions, I'm happy to try and respond.
Okay, Lou, that was amazing. We have 3 questions. The first relates, and they're all different. They couldn't possibly be grouped. The first one is from Aaron, and he's interested in denials, requests that are denied for lack of data, and is specifically related to trials. So a denial comes about a trial because of lack of data, because the home environment is not suitable for a trial to take place in that environment. So what to do about that? Denials related to trials.
So I am taking from that more than one question, and I'm going to try and answer all that I could identify. So first is whether it's possible to establish that a device will be useful in all of the client's typical communication environments without actually trying it in all of those environments. And it's an issue that is part of the New York guideline, which was one of the slides in the course of the presentation. And the answer that comes from New York repeatedly is that it is possible to show that a device will be useful, because the purpose of a trial is to provide a basis for a prospective judgment about the suitability of the device to meet this client's or enable the client to meet his daily communication needs. And you don't have to use the device in every single possible setting before you can say that, yes, the device is portable, the client knows how to use it, the client will be able to access it wherever the client is, and that, yes, the device is suitable in all of those environments. That's number one. The second is data. So the purpose of a trial is to set up goals and to set up something that's measurable and then to test the client or observe the client and to prepare information in the form of how well the client performed in relation to the various goals, and that's the data. What is essential is that SLPs set up the trial in a way that the goals are likely to reflect reasonable levels of achievement in the trial period. So the argument that we're having in court with New York Medicaid is that the demand that Medicaid makes as a goal to be proficient at the end of a month isn't realistic. There's no literature that says that a person can learn eye gaze in a month. There's no literature that says you can become proficient in a month. And for Medicaid simply to say we demand that is unreasonable. But for the purpose of saying that yes, there's data, the SLP should be collecting data. One of the issues that arises is if the SLP evaluator and the person overseeing the trial aren't the same person. So for example, if someone is an out-of-school SLP doing an evaluation and the trial will occur while the student is in school, that coordination is necessary. But it should be possible to gather data, and the data should be based again on goals that are reasonably achievable in the trial period. Hope I answered that comprehensively.
Okay, and related to that is another question. I tried to answer it, but the question relates to the 4 goals for the trial, and I'm going to just say it's interested, that the person understood, can understand, has access to it, and benefits from it. So that answers that question: interest, understanding, access, and benefit. Another question, Lou, is it important for consumers who are facing funding barriers to be members of USSAAC, and how would you facilitate that?
I think that it would be both great and that it is valuable to them, for families and for people with complex communication needs, to join us and to add their experiences to our knowledge base as an organization, as professionals. And
Right.
How do they join? I would hope that they would learn of USSAAC through our activities and through word of mouth through their SLPs.
Great. And here's another question. This is a different topic, but it relates to literature searches and the USSAAC website. And without going into any details, just the ability to build that clearinghouse on the USSAAC website, and what would the priorities be, and how would people know what the priorities are for faculty and students since everybody's so busy? Do you have any thoughts about that, Lou? That's from Jennifer.
I'm very selfish in this regard, and I would love for the resources to be developed in relation to the barriers that I encounter in my daily practice. But the idea that we can come up with a list of questions that are important, rather than just interesting, but that are important because they're likely to arise in funding disputes, is something that's possible. It requires discussion. And the opportunity to join and to have that discussion is one of the reasons why we're having the session this evening.
Great. And this is from Kathy, who asks, in her state, the Medicaid prior authorizations are done by nurses, and how do we get them to hire SLPs and OTs to be on the prior authorization team?
So I'm going to answer this 2 ways. So the first is, do we want SLPs to be reviewers? And I know that answering with a question is just rhetorical. So where you have a funding program that is really objective about serving clients, having an SLP as the reviewer, as a skilled reviewer, is very valuable. If, on the other hand, you have a program that has a history of going out of its way to find ways to say no, having an SLP reviewer will make life very difficult. And encouraging an SLP reviewer is really, well, be careful what you wish for. On the other hand, let's go back to the nurse example. Nurses are medical professionals. They don't know anything necessarily about the individuals who need communication devices and are seeking them, or about the communication devices themselves. And perhaps there's an opportunity, and this varies from state to state, but perhaps there's an opportunity to educate them and let them remain nurses and let them remain the reviewers, but let them at least understand what it is that they're doing. Let them understand the difference or see the difference between a good report and a report that leaves some things out, and a report that could be improved if they would go back to ask the SLP to supplement one or more things that they said but wasn't defined or explained very well.
Okay. We're going to have to wind down because we just have a few more minutes in the webinar. There are some additional questions that we can address, Luke can address, and they're great questions. So, but for now, we have to conclude or get to the conclusion. Lou, thanks so much for your historic perspective, your call to action, your reminder that we have to be vigilant. I know that you have an advocacy committee that people who join can use, who are USSAAC members can participate in, and we now have communication access for 3 million people that didn't have it when you started talking about this. It's obviously a critical human right. We've come a long way and we need to keep going. Thank you all for participating this evening. I just want to quickly review some of the logistics. Watch for an email following this webcast that's going to help you with CEUs, accessing past webinars, accessing the archived version of this webinar. Please fill out the evaluation survey, and please join USSAAC. The next webinar will be on April 5th. It's with Lucas Stuber, and the topic will be emergent symbolic language in autism spectrum disorders, and Lisa Tim will be your facilitator for that. Also, we have a Twitter chat every second Thursday that occurs at 7 p.m. So we'll be signing off now. Thank you again. Thank you to our talented presenter and advocate. Thanks to all of you who are participating and joined USSAAC or will join USSAAC, to our committees, and to Franklin Smith and Isaac for making the series possible. Till next time.